3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
All right, welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of mass shootings. So there have been many topics I've covered on this podcast, which have been historical issues going back thousands of years. However, unfortunately, this is one particular topic which is much more of a modern issue, and that is mass shootings. So mass shootings have occurred around the world for several years now, but no nation is more famous for mass shootings than the United States of America. In fact, it was in 1966 that mass shootings really started to emerge and get mainstream media attention when 14 people were killed by a gunman with a legally purchased semi-automatic rifle, a hunting rifle, a shotgun, and several handguns at the University of Texas in what was the deadliest shooting in American history. However, after the shooting, no gun reforms occurred. And from here, mass shootings would become an increasing trend in the U.S., where weapons get legally purchased in most cases by a person who then goes off to kill a bunch of people, and then people become outraged around the country talking about how things need to change, and then sadly, nothing actually happens. For example, this happened in 1984, when a gunman legally acquired weapons to kill a new record of 21 people at McDonald's in California, and afterwards society, like the Texas shooting, just moved on without any gun reform. The same thing then also happened again in 1991, where a gunman would legally purchase weapons and then kill a new record of 23 people at a restaurant in Texas, and then again in 2007, when a gunman legally purchased weapons to kill another new record of 32 people at Virginia Tech University. So at this point, you might start to think, after college kids getting killed, what will it take for people to react and do something about this? Unfortunately, though, American complacency would only get worse from there. Because in 2012, a gunman would then kill 28 people, mostly small children, at an elementary school in Connecticut. And once again, no federal legislation would occur afterwards. Thus, gun violence would just continue and get worse. For instance, in 2016, a gunman killed a new record of 49 people at a nightclub popular among the LGBTQ community in a terrorist attack in Florida. And then in 2017, a gunman with 49 legally purchased weapons killed 58 people and wounded about 850 in Las Vegas. And once again, basically no gun reform happened. After the Las Vegas shooting, something called bump stocks were banned, which allows someone to replicate automatic weapon gunfire with a semi-automatic rifle, but that was it. And of course, recently we had the Buffalo shooting and a Texas elementary school shooting where a bunch of little kids were killed once again. So this trend just keeps going on and on and on and on. However, it should also be pointed out, though, that this is only one side of the story when it comes to gun violence in America. Because large mass shootings typically get the most attention across the country. But most Americans who die from gun violence die every day in lesser known shootings, many of which occur in American cities and specifically impoverished neighborhoods. For example, in 2020, the most Americans ever died from gun violence, which was 45,220 people. That's more than the number of Americans killed in both the Korean War and the American Revolutionary War. And so far this year in 2022, there have been over 250 mass shootings and over 20,000 people have died from gun violence. Thus, when it comes to reactions, most Americans want some sort of gun reform in this country. However, gun zealots in the U.S. will dismiss mass shootings as a mental health crisis and not a gun problem. In fact, many will talk about how we need more guns, which makes no sense. And meanwhile, gun violence in American cities is dismissed as a cultural problem embedded in those communities or is just completely ignored. In reality, though, the problem is simply weak gun laws. Mass shootings happen because almost any person with a pulse can legally purchase a weapon and then go and kill people. So, anyone with some mental health issue or some axe to grind who's upset about something has been given this option by the U.S. government. As long as they don't have some sort of criminal record, they can just go off and purchase a gun and then go and kill a bunch of people. And this happens again and again and again. While routine gun violence in American cities is often due to these poor neighborhoods that have too much access to guns, which clearly is a recipe for disaster, because if you look at the history of, impoverished communities around the world, typically they have more crime. And when you give them access to guns, that's just going to make things much worse. Because the issue of poverty and guns contribute to each other. Poverty increases the likelihood of crime. And obviously, when you have guns, that's going to lead to more gun violence. While gun violence increases the likelihood of poor communities in American cities staying poor, because it makes it hard for these communities to improve since people don't want to invest their money into a community that they don't feel safe in. Because people want to be able to protect their investments, whether it's buying a home or starting a business in an area. People typically want to live in a nice area or an area where they don't have to worry about gun violence. And so without that protection of their investments, these communities are viewed as too big of a financial liability. And thus the problem just becomes circular and it just goes around and around and around and around and never ends. Now, obviously, better gun control won't magically get rid of crime across America. But it will certainly get rid of the worst of it. Because you're going to have far less gun violence, which will dramatically increase the ability for people to feel safe across this country. And for evidence of this, for those who are skeptical of the idea that gun control actually works, all we need to do is just look abroad. For instance, in 1996 in Australia, a gunman legally purchased guns and killed 35 people. However, afterwards, unlike the United States, much stricter gun control occurred. There was almost a complete ban on automatic and semi-automatic weapons, and a government buyback program was created. And over time, this resulted in gun violence deaths dropping from 516 in 1996 to 232 in 2016, which is about a 45% decrease in 10 years. And another example happened in 1996 in Scotland when a gunman legally purchased guns and killed 16 people. And afterwards, once again, unlike the United States, several gun restrictions occurred. Thus, in 1996, there were 247 deaths due to gun violence in Britain, and by 2016, there were only 107, showing a 43% decrease in 10 years. So meanwhile, while countries that have enacted gun reform after a shooting have had decreases of over 40%, in the United States, we're having record numbers of people killed in the 45,000 a year range. Therefore, when it comes to wealthy nations around the world, there is almost no nation whose government cares less about gun violence than the American government. Most people in the United States, again, would like some sort of increase in gun control. However, too many politicians and too many on the Supreme Court have aligned themselves with the historical revisionism regarding the Second Amendment, which is often promoted by gun zealots, instead of the opinion of the majority of Americans, which is, hey, we probably shouldn't have this many people getting killed due to gun violence. Thus, until these politicians lose elections and until these Supreme Court justices are either replaced or outnumbered, the history of the American gun violence epidemic will just continue. In fact, hundreds of years from now, historians will likely write about this embarrassing era of American politics. But more importantly, they will also write about the Americans who finally stood up and said, this is enough, and helped create some type of change, whether it's by voting or getting involved politically somehow. Thus, until that change comes, though, we will just have to continue to strive for it. After all, what kind of country do you want to live in? One where you have to tell your little kids, or nieces and nephews, or younger siblings, hey, be careful at school because you could get shot? Or one where we don't even have to think about that as an issue? At the end of the day, the choice is ours. As always, remember, billions of years led to you, so make the most of it.